I said a couple things in my last video that I need to correct, so I'm going to use this to replace it. Um, so if you heard the previous one, then you don't have to worry about listening to it again because I'm going to say the same thing. So get my share screen here. The Seminole War Convocation in Jupiter, Florida was the previous weekend, April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and it was a historical event. It was commemorating the Battle of Loxahatchee, which was the largest battle of the Second Seminole War in number of soldiers participating, about 1,600 soldiers under the command of General Thomas S. Jessup, and included dragoons, Tennessee militia, the Creek Regiment, and the regular Army are artillery soldiers. And hope I got that right. So I don't want to go back to that. So commemorating it and having a program on the battlefield. Of course, we can't forget to go to Jupiter and not do a climb on the lighthouse. That's our evening exercise after the drive down there. Was about 34 steps to the bottom of the lighthouse, and then 105 steps up the spiral staircase of the lighthouse. So about 140 steps. And I can't imagine the lighthouse keeper going up there at least twice a day carrying like a container of kerosene or oil for the light. And a lot of hard work. So, but I think it's one of the prettiest lighthouses in Florida. It gives a good commanding view of Jupiter Inlet. So our Seminole War Convocation on Saturday was at the Civic Center, and great facility. Thank you for the host, the Loxahatchee Battlefield Preservationists, for hosting it. Here are some of the artifacts from the Battle of Loxahatchee. This piece of wood, about 18 inches, is a remnant of the battle. You can see in the other sideway view here a musket ball right there. There's an indention of a musket ball there and one there. So they counted about 14 places where it had been hit by musket balls and buckshot on this. They think this was part of the breastwork on the Seminole position. The Seminoles have very wise and entrenched position. They think this was part of a dugout canoe. They just, put it as a barricade. And that's one of the things going on at the convention center. The speakers we had include speakers like Brian Zapata, the Seminole Tribe, I think it's Louis Gopher, and anyway, and also Lewis Johnson of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. This was a historical event because the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma was returning to Florida, going full circle. On Saturday evening, we went out to the site of the actual Jupiter, Fort Jupiter. And as part of the history, after the battle, the Seminoles met there to meet with General Jessup, Seminoles and Miccosukees, and they said, all we want is a small piece of land to live on and not have to fight. And General Jessup, I'll save that part for after the battle. Let's go to the battlefield. There's Loxahatchee River Battlefield Park, west of town, west of the turnpike off Indiantown Road, is where the battle was. They found it in the 1990s. There was actually two battles in this location. Powell's Battle on January 15th, 1838. Lieutenant Levin Powell came up with about 5 or 6 boats full of naval sailors and artillery soldiers, and they were looking for a Seminole village. They found a woman which they captured, and she led them around in circles until she led them to the side of the village where the warriors were waiting for him and ambushed them. And it was a running battle 5 miles back to their boats, and they almost got wiped out. At least 5 sailors got killed, about 30 were wounded. The Dr. Leitner, the surgeon, was killed. Body was never recovered. And if it was not for Army Lieutenant Joseph E. Johnston working a artillery piece to force the Indians back, then the sailors would have been wiped out getting to their boats. Well, General Jessup got word of that. And so 9 days later, he shows up with 1,600 of the soldiers, the dragoons, the Tennessee militia, and the regular Army soldiers and all that. And they approach a position heavily entrenched. Jessup says that the Seminoles, if they wanted to, they could have held up forever there and held its army back. Eventually, they backed Seminoles back out of there, probably because they had evacuated the village. The dragoons flank around, and the battle ends. But during the battle, the Tennessee volunteers were doing very poorly. They were not doing close quarter fighting. They were under-trained, not well trained. And so General Jessup tells them, "Follow me." And with his horse, he rides into the middle of the river. And this the side of the Indian village here, trail that you can walk on in the park today. And this is maybe the point where it happened. Jessup says, "Follow me," goes into the river, looks behind him, and nobody's following him. And so he's mad about that. He's shot in the cheek. Shot in the cheek or in the face, and has to pull back. So he's mad at that and fails to cross the river. This area where the Seminoles were entrenched was like a bastion or a fort. You had a curve in the river. It overlooks a good commanding position. So you could say Jessup failed to capture the village, but at the same time, the Seminoles evacuated. Because the soldiers eventually got across the river, they called it a victory on their side. But if the Seminoles escape and maybe one of them was killed, they didn't capture any prisoners, maybe they won. It depends on who you ask. Shortly thereafter, Jessup was meeting with the Seminole chiefs at Fort Jupiter, and the Seminoles asked, "All we want is a small piece of land to live upon in peace and stay in Florida. We don't want to go to the West. Can you guarantee that for us?" Jessup says he does not have the authority to make that decision. He'll have to write Washington. So he does. A couple weeks later, the letter comes back. Washington says no negotiation. So very quickly, Jessup has the dragoons on one side and the Tennessee volunteers on the other circle the Seminole encampment very quickly, disarms them, takes their muskets and rifles and the horses, and then puts them in shackles and chains and has their encampment surrounded on the peninsula where they're at, so they cannot escape. And from there, the Seminoles and their black allies, they number about 700, about 118 black allies from looking on the roster. They are taken to Tampa Bay, and then they're taken to New Orleans and out to Indian Territory or Oklahoma. So it is the beginning of the Trail of Tears for the Seminoles being forcibly removed at this point, several hundred, one of the largest captures and removals during the war, although there will be several. This was the Trail of Tears. And a couple videos ago, I talked about Siggy's Second Jumper and the Apache Trail of Tears. It's pretty much the same thing, where they're forced from their home, have to go hundreds of miles out to a strange place and forced to move there. They have some relatives that stay behind and never see the ones again that go out to Oklahoma. And during the archaeological excavation, they found some of the shackles and chains, and this shackle and a stake to stake him down. This is probably one of the best preserved ones. Most of them are rusted. And this was the most emotional artifact, seeing this, that to realize that somebody was found as a prisoner here and forced to go to Oklahoma. I think what they did when they loaded it on the ship, they just took off the shackles and just discarded them. And that's why they found it doing archaeological work 150 years later, however long it was. The Seminole Nation Chief Lewis Johnson says, "I want those shackles. We made an agreement with the government 50 years ago that we would get the shackles and chains that bound us as prisoner on the trip out west." And he has not yet received that, but hopefully that'll be arranged, because that's something very symbolic to them in Oklahoma. Also, of course, we have our representatives from the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and we have representatives from the Miccosukee Tribe. Betty Osceola, I found very sincere, very friendly. I really enjoyed speaking with her. I know now why Robin's good friends with her. Robin's a good judge of character. They're my friends in South Florida. So it was very significant event for me. I look at it as one of the most significant events that I've seen in Seminole Miccosukee history, Florida, Oklahoma, in 25 years there. 25 years ago, we had the Untitled Museum open up. I also made a trip out to Oklahoma and some other things I won't get into, but that was a very significant time. And for me, this was a very significant time as well. The Seminole War Convocation, it is an event that will not be repeated. We do the Seminole War Convocation every 2 years, had to cancel because of the COVID. And it will be held again, I think, in 2 years at Dade Battlefield. And then after that at Fort King. The Fort King one, they're building a new visitor center, so they won't wait till that is finished. So anyway, very, very meaningful and emotional event. I wish the TV crews and the press had come here. They were all invited, but they decided that there's other things going on that they thought was more newsworthy. To me, this was the most newsworthy thing going on, and very glad to go here. Had some great seminars, and that's it. Hopefully I won't have to record this again. And so I hope you enjoyed it. If you hadn't seen it before, if you had seen it before, I know I was repeating, but I'm kind of a perfectionist on doing some of these things. And thank you for watching.